Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, May the 25th, 2022. The World Economic Forum in Davos is in session. And what can I say about this? The world's most evil and powerful people get together once a year to say openly all the evil things that they want to do. But wait, the fact checkers are on the case. This is from Human Events. Human Events senior editor Jack Posobiec was fact checked by Reuters over his WEF police claim after he was detained by none other than WEF police. He said, apparently, the World Economic Forum under Klaus Schwab has its own paramilitary police force called the World Economic Forum Police. However, this statement has been disputed by fact checkers like Reuters, who clarify that, well, actually, the WEF doesn't have a police force, but instead, the police badges with the WEF logo are used by local officers in Graubünden to mark the organization's annual conference. Posobiec responded in a tweet, you see, the World Economic Forum doesn't have a police force. They're just local police given WEF badges and sent to work for the WEF. It is completely different. Yes, where would we be without the fact checkers? Which leads us to George Soros, who apparently has a net worth of $8.6 billion. Not that much by modern billionaire terms, but more money than any person could imagine. What do we know about George Soros? Well, apparently he's given away $15 billion. And Forbes, this is from Wiki, called him the most generous giver. And who does he give this money to? And for what purposes? Well, in the United States, one of the things that he does is to bankroll the campaigns of lunatics running for district attorneys so that they can no longer arrest and convict criminals. And we all see how that's worked out in, say, San Francisco and Los Angeles. Soros he broke the Bank of England, as they say, and he also destroyed the economies of several East Asian countries to make money. This was during the 1990s. We know that during the Second World War, 1944 to 1945, in Budapest, where Soros was born and raised, I suppose knowing that the jig was up, the Nazis decided to kill as many Jews as they could in Hungary. And so Soros was enlisted with the job of identifying Jews in order to protect his own Jewish family. He said that 1944 had been the happiest year of his life, strange way to put it, for it had given him the opportunity to witness his father's heroism. Now, I'm not going to judge George Soros for this because no one has ever held a gun to my head and ordered me to do something. But it has long been my contention that George Soros's goal is to destroy Western civilization. After the horror that he went through in a supposedly Christian country in Europe, Western civilization, he decided that he was going to burn it all down. We have a story from Agence France Presse. Soros says civilization may not survive Ukraine war. And one very much gets the impression that George Soros hopes that the Russian invasion of the Ukraine will lead to the destruction of civilization. U.S. billionaire George Soros warned Tuesday that civilization may not survive Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but said Europe could have a stronger position against President Vladimir Putin regarding gas than it realizes. In his traditional dinner speech on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in the Swiss mountain town of Davos, The Hungarian-born investor and philanthropist said the war has shaken Europe to its core. The invasion may have been the beginning of the Third World War, and our civilization may not survive it. And I imagine, Kim stroking a Persian cat as he said this. We must mobilize all our resources to bring the war to an early end. The best and perhaps only way to preserve our civilization is to defeat Putin as soon as possible, he said. He praised US and European support for Ukraine, but Europe's dependence on Russian fossil fuels remains excessive, Soros said. The European Union aims to reduce its use of gas by 2/3 this year, but has fallen short of banning imports as some nations, most notably Germany, are heavily reliant on Moscow's exports. Well, why is Germany so heavily reliant on Moscow's exports? Because Germany decided not only to shut down its nuclear power reactors, but also to ban the use of burning coal for energy. Yes, but no. As I say, this is further confirmation to me that George Soros hopes, he's 91 years old now, he hopes he lives long enough to see the destruction of Western civilization. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. As World Economic Forum head Klaus Schwab proclaimed that the future is built by us, hubris much? At the opening of the annual Davos gathering, two other European elites declared that the global energy crisis is a transition that will be painful for most, but should not be resisted by nations tempted to preserve their own sovereignty over the global agenda. Those are words he used. Schwab called those summoned before him a powerful community and declared, quote, "We have the means to improve the state of the world, but two conditions are necessary. The first one is that we all act as stakeholders of larger communities so that we serve not only our self-interests, but we serve the community. That's what we call stakeholder responsibility. And second, that we collaborate. And this is the reason why you find many opportunities here during the meetings to engage into action and impact initiatives to make progress related to specific issues on the global agenda," unquote. As further discussions progressed Monday, German Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck spoke about the energy crisis, warning that governments of individual nations should not seek to protect their own citizens, but instead follow the rule of the markets. In other words, countries need to fall into line with the globalist Great Reset agenda. During another discussion, Norwegian finance CEO Kirsten Brathen described global energy upheaval as a transition, while admitting there will be mass shortages and economic hardship, but claiming that the pain is worth it. Interesting that this Davos elitist used the exact same phrasing as Joe Biden on the same day. Journalist Andrew Lawton documented more of Davos cabal drooling over the possibilities for global control that their Great Reset could engender. Alibaba Group President J. Michael Evans boasts at the World Economic Forum about the development of an individual carbon footprint tracker to monitor what you buy, what you eat, and where and how you travel. On the World Economic Forum's panel on a reimagined global tax system, Oxfam Executive Director Gabriela Buscher called for a global 25% corporate tax rate and complains that countries are lowering taxes to be competitive. Australian e-safety Commissioner Julie Inman Grant tells the World Economic Forum we need a recalibration of freedom of speech. A CNN anchor, the chairman of Credit Suisse, and France's top central banker giddily discussed the arrival of a central bank digital currency within 5 years at the World Economic Forum in Davos. You see, these people are so confident in their ability to get whatever they want that they are saying the quiet parts out loud. Remarkable stuff, actually. Remarkable stuff. But one of the top figures in YouTube won't let me open this video for some reason. Has it been taken down? Before I get to this one particular person, I'm going to read from an article from nakedcapitalism.com by Eve Smith. Paradigm and nervous breakdown. Globalization goes into reverse as inflation scarcity crisis accelerates. Your humble blogger has pointedly ignored a lot of day-to-day excitement, even though it might have made for fun and even instructive posts, like the repo panic of a few years back, SPACs, NFTs, crypto gyrations, because they weren't of systemic importance, and I didn't want to dignify some of the prevailing storylines by trying to debunk them. I thought to write about inflation, but was instead arrested by the front page of the Financial Times. It struck me that the evidence of a multi-fronted breakdown of our political economic system is becoming too great to ignore. Of course, when I looked again, hours later, warmongering had returned to the lead stories. Biden pledges to defend Taiwan militarily if China were to invade, and the big read, how war in Ukraine convinced Germany to rebuild its army. But let's focus on the mounting evidence of the current order unraveling. I suppose that should be mountainous. The headline for the upcoming Davos in person is business leaders warn that the three-decade era of globalization is ending. However, this group sees a reduction in trade as vexing rather than catastrophic. There's a whistling past the graveyard quality to this discussion. Maybe they don't want to spook investors, but they act as if they can't see the train bearing down on them. Capitalism in advanced economies is at real risk of not delivering on its promise of provisioning at least adequately for the majority of people, particularly those who work. There's also a failure to admit to the political and economic fault lines between the US and Europe and their Asian protectorates, Japan and South Korea, versus China, Russia, India, the Middle East, and the global South. That schism is made worse by Russia's strong market position in many key commodities, and the West having allowed China to become the factory of the world. If things get really ugly, China and India overwhelmingly dominate the production of active ingredients for the pharmaceutical industry, as well as making many end products. China also has a virtual monopoly in the production of vitamin C, which, among other things, is an important food preservative. Let's look at the UK, which admittedly is serving as an advanced economy canary in the coal mine. Its official inflation rate is already 9% year over year. The headline story tonight is how by October, as in before winter cold really sets in, 40% of UK households will be facing fuel poverty, which is a polite way of saying you have to choose between having a full belly and being warm. Mind you, the UK also had a petrol shortage last year and could have one again in as soon as a month if workers at the UK's biggest refinery vote to strike. And we have coming global food shortages, which will hit the UK hard by virtue of relying significantly on imports. Last week, the Bank of England described them as apocalyptic. The governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, singles out Russia for a blockade, allegedly preventing Ukraine's wheat and sunflower oil from getting to market. But experts were predicting food shortages for 2022 even before the conflict erupted. Ukraine is the number 5 grain exporter at just under 7% of global supply. The number 2, number 3, and number 4 exporters are in order: Canada, the United States, and France. France is expected to have a very poor year due to drought. U.S. winter wheat output is projected to be down 8%. Canada's is projected to be up due to very high prices, leading farmers to shift acreage to wheat. And the blockade charges a fabrication. It's Ukraine that mined Black Sea ports and is continuing to blockade them. The International Maritime Organization confirms Russia's claims that it has established humanitarian corridors that remain open daily, but that Ukraine is preventing them from operating properly. Oh, and on top of that, the UK might have a rail strike in coming weeks. The Sky News headline gives a good overview. Fears the biggest rail strike in modern history will create serious challenges in keeping goods moving and supermarkets stopped. There's other fresh evidence of globalization breakdown. China's house organ Global Times noted unilateral sanctions add evidence that it's no longer safe to hold assets in the United States. While that may seem obvious, it's one thing in China to think it, and quite another to start making policy statements and official warnings. China having reservation about holding assets in the US is far more serious than it seems. The US runs ginormous sustained trade deficits with China. That means China accumulates US financial assets. The usual approach for a country in China's position is to hold a combination in a pretty liquid form as a defense against a run on the currency and to invest the rest in the importer's economy, ideally in productive investment like companies, foreign operations of Chinese companies, or foreign direct investment, such as buying all or parts of US companies, or real estate, or if push comes to shove, buying stocks and making loans. And to keep this post to a manageable length, we will only mention in passing that we can't imagine the big news of the evening that China has made China any more trusting of the US. Recall that Biden himself, in his last call to Xi, reaffirmed that the US respected the one China policy that just went out the window. So I've spoken previously about a man, an Israeli called Yuval Noah Harari, who may just be the most evil person on earth. He is a supposed big thinker. He writes those books that, here is explains everything in the world, or here is what's going to happen. And I know this because I have a big, big brain. This fellow was at he is a high official in the World Economic Forum, and he was quoted saying, or he made a public speech saying, yes, that the COVID lockdowns were excellent because it proved that power could be marshaled in this way. But the next step is to start surveilling people's insides. Yes, what they're eating, how much of it, which drugs they are taking, and which drugs presumably they should take. Harari, who, by the way, is a homosexual vegan, believes that most people are, quote, useless eaters, unquote. Yes, useless human beings who do not have meaning or purpose. He said the greatest fake news is the Bible. He said Christianity is wrong, that humans are here on earth for nothing. Jesus Christ is fake news. He believes there is no great cosmic plan that humans have a role to play in. Instead, he views humans as useless eaters who can be hacked and manipulated using digital surveillance under their skin. He also believes in culling the population. What do we need so many humans for? He is quoted as saying while promoting his latest book. In a recent interview, Harari said the world is entering a new industrial revolution, but the products will not be physical goods. Harari said science, technology, and industry's greatest challenge of the 21st century will be, quote, to try to gain control of the world inside us, to learn how to engineer and produce bodies and brains and minds, unquote. He said, once you know how to produce bodies and brains and minds, so cheap labor in Africa and South Asia, it simply counts for nothing. The biggest question, and maybe in economics and politics of the coming decades, will be what to do with all these useless people. He said, technology will ensure that everyone is fed, so food is not the problem. Quote, the problem is more boredom and what to do with them, and how will they find some sense of meaning in life when they are basically meaningless, worthless, unquote. He prescribed drugs and computer games as solutions to entertain useless people's brains. Well, as we have discovered, the combination of drugs and computer games leads to mass killers. That's what it leads to. But again, talk about saying the quiet part out loud. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Anran Adan, respectable commenting name. Hello to System Analyst, who says, badges, we don't need no stinking badges. A very famous movie reference. Hello to Dawn from Beyond. Quachulango, hello, says, we're really going to lose to Schwab and Gates. Well, I don't really think that they're going to succeed. But I'm just rather surprised that, when one does a Google search on this Harari fellow, that I did a search and then added the word evil, And I got what you might call a few fringe publications and some Christian publications. Yeah, sure. Let's have government take total control of our bodies. But wait a minute. I thought personal autonomy was paramount. Keep your rosaries off my ovaries, etc., etc. Well, again, this is another whom question. Yo Mama, hello, says, fun fact, Soros's native tongue is Esperanto. Yes, Soros. It works the same forwards and backwards. And his father was an Esperanto kook in early 20th century Europe. A lot of the people who had big ideas for revolutionizing the world were evangelists for Esperanto, which of course is a made-up language. There's a lot of power that's a lot of power and influence for $8 billion. He couldn't even buy Twitter, says David Wright. Don Willis says, we're in the fight for our very lives. These bastards must be turned back. Indeed. Hello to Metal Mike and David the Gnome. Systems analyst said, I appreciate the Schwab pronunciation, but it should be a P sound at the end. Schwab. Okay. All right. KMG should do stand-up comedy, says Metal Mike. Well, I'm doing sitting down comedy. I like corn, and now they say it's bad, says Quacha Longo. Well, beans can be delicious if they are cooked properly. Was that Tyler Cowen? Maniac libertarian. Everything causes cancer. There's no cure. There's no answer. Joe Jackson. That's from Don Willis. Joe Jackson, I don't know whether he was very vocal on the anti-smoking campaign. And he did some, research to determine, here's something you might not have heard. In 1997, the World Health Organization did a meta-analysis on studies pointing to the risk or lack thereof of secondhand smoke, and concluded there was no appreciable damage from secondhand smoke. And guess what? This study was suppressed. I know it existed because it was reported in the London Telegraph. Respectable commenting name says they feel confident because no one is opposing them, and no one is opposing them because of a learned helplessness. Well, Michelle Poppers Rempel Garner is one of the WEF political fellows. And she wrote a piece saying, oh, no, it's just a talking shop in Switzerland, and these people have no power or influence. Of course, Michelle Poppers Rempel Garner wants Canada to be overwhelmed by immigrants. So clearly she is under no WEF influence. Who are these strangers who pass through the door, who cover your action and go you one more? Steely Dan, Your Gold Teeth. That was from the second Steely Dan album. One of my very favorites, which didn't sell all that well compared to the first or the third. But I like it a lot. Chocokin666 says, how do you oppose a miasma? A Tarot Destroyer says, cancer is the body's inability to stop the process of healing, the same natural process in producing a placenta, that 1 pound organ attached to the uterine membrane, which nourishes developing baby. The essential anti-cancer tumoricidal vitamin is vitamin B17, known as amygdalin, and as Laetril when synthesized from apricot pips. Quachalango asks a question about Ethan Ralph. I can't answer it. I think he interviewed me once a couple of years ago. Tarot Destroyer adds, China's Four Pests campaign of 1958 to 62 eliminated rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. The extermination of sparrows resulted in an ecological imbalance, prompting Mao to redirect the focus to bed bugs. It was around that time, the Great Leap Forward, that Mao Zedong, who was just a nutter, plain and simple, thought that peasants in their huts could produce pig iron. And that was China's, that was going to prepare China for the future. If one believes Nikita Khrushchev, Mao Zedong was quite blithe about the prospect of a nuclear war, explaining that at the time China had 750 million people. And if 250 million Chinese were to die in this Holocaust, well, there'd still be 500 million left. Khrushchev said that he could scarcely believe it. Who else do we have? Strategically adaptive Memeplex says you have to hate this country to send its manufacturing overseas. Now, what's the worst that could happen? You know that the skins, for whatever they call them, for sausages, right? That sort of thing. Do you know that they're 100% produced in China? A country that has a very shoddy record when it comes to safety of all kinds. Our entire industrial economy is producing gay flags, says Jogokin 666. And do we have anything else? Let's see. Respectable commenting name says he did interview you once, and you also reacted to a rather unhinged rant of his back on the old Luke 4 show in a humorous fashion. Remember when the Irony Bros were on and Kyle asked Chogokin 666? Yes. I think Kyle departed because, well, I suppose he was fed up with me, but I don't know. I kind of liked Kyle, I have to say, because he rather reminded me of, well, a young me in certain respects. So let's talk about the Ukraine. You want to hear about the Ukraine, right? We can't just hear enough about the Ukraine. And this is an essay by Frank Wright on his Substack, 3 Ways of Seeing Ukraine. Now, earlier, he had posted about the 3 different parts of the Ukraine. And then he added to that the 3 sorts of soldier. I came across the Ukrainian Telegram channel, which published a strange piece about the 3 types of Ukrainian soldier. It mentioned Azov and Right Sector, etc. battalions, the cowboys, the Ukrainian Special Forces, the specialists, and the Ukrainian Russian regular army, cannon fodder. Yes, cannon fodder. 3 European views. The emerging European view is complicated by the kind of competing interests which typically lead to war. There are 3 basic positions. 1, sanctions must increase, the war must intensify. 2, sanctions are destroying Europe. And 3, negotiations must take place. Britain is perhaps the most bellicose of all European nations, being committed to sending weapons and money to the Ukrainian regime. Poland is a close second. It remains to be seen what Poland intends to do, as rumors persist of a military intervention in the Sort 1 region of Ukraine. Yes, the Western, or formerly German Ukraine, Galicia, as it was known. Finland, under its wise leadership, is to discard its neutrality and seeks to move into NATO. Russia is going to cut off its gas supply to Finland as a result. The EU is moving to seize Russia's foreign reserves of $300 billion to, quote, rebuild Ukraine. The Germans are facing deindustrialization as a result of the removal of a significant portion of their energy supply. Ukraine cut off one of 2 gas transit points to Europe this week, reducing gas flows to Germany by 25%. Business leaders from Bosch, BASF, and others have repeatedly warned that disruption on this scale will halt German industry. Baerbock proceeds with this policy regardless and is now moving to halt Russian oil imports. Spain and Italy appear to support this policy despite earlier hesitancy. Hungary has already stated that it cannot survive without Russian oil. Slovakia, Croatia, Bulgaria, and the Czech Republic describe their situation in similar stark terms. A division exists between these countries and the larger EU states over the impact of refusing Russian oil and gas. Europe gets 25% of its oil from Russia, and some states, such as Italy, rely on it for 40% of their gas. The policy of removing oil and gas imports is appealing to the German Green Party, who secured about 25% of the vote in the last elections. Yes, apparently 25% of Germans decided to vote for their own extinction. The German Foreign Minister Baerbock and Vice Chancellor Habeck are both Greens, as is the Minister of Food and that of Environment. I'll just break in here to say that as far as the UK and the loss of its energy, I've long said which is the first, Western nation to collapse. And I believe it would be the United Kingdom. Well, it's not a nation, really. But the country has been so badly administered by such clowns for so long that imagine 40% of Britons being at risk of, freezing during the winter. I seriously don't think that country under its present regime could survive that. But back to Frank Wright. France appears under Macron to be making conciliatory noises to Russia, which is curious for Europe's number one energy exporter. Their nuclear program allows them to export electricity, especially to Britain. Industry leaders throughout Europe have repeatedly stressed the need to avoid cutting off gas and oil to avoid the destruction of European manufacturing. And the very idea that we're talking about the destruction of European manufacturing in aid of the most corrupt country in the West, the world capital of money laundering, white slavery, and the surrogate baby racket. Just amazing. Three means of battle: proxy war. NATO is at war by proxy. The situation looks likely to escalate. Two obvious outcomes appear to be Polish entry into Ukraine and NATO entry through Moldova. There are other reasons of escalation which at present remain possible but seem less immediate. The means of battle engaged in by NATO and the United States is attritional, and its object is to cause a Russian loss in Ukraine through maximization of casualties on both sides. Of course, the aim is also to transfer billions to the military-industrial complex, which will enrich everyone in the regime enormously, whilst destroying yet another country. It looks unlikely that Ukraine will exist when this war is over, but that is not relevant to U.S. objectives. Ukraine is the site of anti-Russian action. This is the new focus for the war machine. We're used to seeing the U.S., NATO, conduct shock and awe operations. Aerial bombing, often on a spectacular scale, is used against civilian populations and military installations in as in Serbia, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. It was reasonable to expect the same kind of television war as to that which we have become accustomed. The Russians did not provide this and have not conducted aerial bombing sorties in a similar fashion. The Russians do have more troops, air, and firepower to throw at Ukraine. They have not done so. A quick advance does not seem to be the plan. Why would this be the case? Surely to argue against quick advances is to try to avoid admitting your failure. Ask yourself the result of shock and awe. The best example, Iraq, saw the country conquered and the Iraqi army surrender in about 6 weeks. The insurgency continued for 8 years, and following the withdrawal of the U.S., Iraq remains largely a client state of Iran. Afghanistan furnishes another example. The country was heavily occupied, a client regime installed within months, but the war continued for 2 decades. Do you remember how that ended? $86 billion worth of military hardware was left behind for the Taliban as the Afghan government dissolved within hours, leaving the Taliban firmly in charge. These are the lessons of shock and awe. It is a spectacle whose consequences are unmanageable and which leads to strategic defeat at enormous cost in blood, treasure, and prestige. In both cases, the enemies of the United States have emerged more powerful from these camera-friendly adventures. And there's a graphic here of Vladimir Zelensky, who has a trade offer. I receive tens of billions in foreign aid. You receive food shortages, recession, record inflation, and skyrocketing home prices. What's the point of a 20-year war that you lose, retreat from in chaos, and just shrug your shoulders before moving on to the next one? The transfer of money to itself is the purpose of the ruling regime. War does this very efficiently. It is probably doing that for those who run the Russian state too. Most of the aid to Ukraine is just theft. Consider the pallets of cash, of gold in Iraq and Afghanistan. Remember that under COVID, more money was transferred from people like you to people like them than ever before. This rising tide has sunk everyone but the super rich and the corporations, whose share of wealth increased enormously owing to the ruinous measures taken during the pandemic. Ruinous to you. COVID crushed the working class and accelerated the destruction of the middle class, a process which has been ongoing since the 1970s. These policies of destruction, which seem so insane from your point of view, make perfect sense if you have stock in Raytheon are a member of the financial elite or belong to some state-level bureaucracy, which seems to get extraordinarily lucky in choosing investments. The third way of seeing war is as war on the ordinary population. No one cares about you, about the people of Ukraine, whichever sort you prefer. With the benefit of this third perspective, everything makes sense. The war was a setup to make obscene amounts of money now and into the future through a reinvigorated military-industrial complex. The last big earner fizzled out in Afghanistan, and now we have a new one. No one mentions the peace dividend anymore. Yes, peace sells, but who's buying? As the famous song has it. Let's look at an essay here from im1776.com by Nathan Fisher called Understanding of Vladimir Putin. On Oliver Stone's interviews with Vladimir Putin, an exercise in cognitive empathy, Western analysts begrudgingly acknowledge that Vladimir Putin is popular in Russia, but attribute this to his supposed total control of domestic media. Without this grip on information, many of them seem to seriously believe that Alexei Navalny or some other dissident leader crafted in their own image, such as Garry Kasparov, would sweep the country and transform it into a textbook representative democracy. Whether this judgment is rooted in stupidity, dishonesty, or mere naivete is hard to say. Listening to Western outlets since the start of the war in Ukraine, it is hard not to think the West's view of Russia's media environment is a case of projection. With few exceptions, mainstream American media uniformly believes that the Russian leader bears a sole responsibility for the conflict. With no other issue before, one could expect to hear precisely the same opinions from NPR and the screaming brand of conservative talk radio. The only difference is the tone. NPR broadcasters rarely forget to take their Valium, and so are less likely to yell into their microphones that Putin is an evil dictator, a vicious tyrant, or simply a butcher. The propaganda is as vociferous as that directed against the bloodthirsty German Huns who were supposedly lifting Belgian children on their bayonets for sport in 1914. Speaking of Germany, its press isn't any better. On its nightly political talk shows, politicians across the spectrum have been overusing the term Vernichtungskrieg, War of Annihilation, which is particularly lurid given that this word is generally applied to Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union and the Holocaust. It is hard to hear such hyperbole and not think the West is committed to waging war on Russia and is prepared to say anything to bring it about. With this background and skeptical attitude in mind, I sat down to watch Oliver Stone's series of interviews with Putin, recorded between 2015 and 2017. My aim was to escape the Western attitude, it is always and forever, September 1938, and simply listen to what Putin had to say. Diplomacy, after all, used to be about what Robert Wright refers to as cognitive empathy, an effort to see the world from your counterpart's perspective, recognize legitimate aims and objectives, and try to reach some sort of solution that avoids conflict. What follows is my own effort to understand aspects of the Russian narrative without immediately assuming bad faith at every turn. As Western media likes to remind us, Vladimir Putin views the fall of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and his overarching goal is to recreate some version of the USSR, even by force if necessary. Putin, after all, is a former KGB agent who in his bones must remain a staunch communist with all that implies. This was John McCain's view, but Stone's interviews with Putin reveal this narrative to be at best superficial. If you take Putin at his word, it's a cartoon. Consider this. That oft-cited remark above comes from a 2005 address to the Russian parliament, but it was followed by more. Putin added, the fall of the Soviet Union for the Russian people became a genuine tragedy. Tens of millions of our fellow citizens and countrymen found themselves beyond the fringes of Russian territory. This is a point that Putin stresses throughout the interview as well. In the USSR, Russians settled in territories that formally were not part of the Russian state. When the various republics broke off and became independent, in excess of 20 million Russians became minorities overnight, often in countries that despised them. The Baltic countries are good examples of that. Latvia is something like about 40% Russian, and the Latvians hate the Russians for, well, obvious reasons. And this is not just a point that Putin likes to make. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said much the same thing. In other words, Putin views the fall of the Soviet Union as a catastrophe not in itself, but for the Russian people. It's clear his aim isn't to rebuild it, nor to make any editorial remarks on the virtues of communism. He even outright tells Stone that the economic system of the USSR was a failure. He blames Gorbachev for recognizing that changes were needed, glasnost and perestroika, but thinks Gorbachev and his entourage had no clue how to go about reforming the system. Anyone who has read Paul Klebnikov's book, Godfather of the Kremlin, which describes the rise of 1990s gangster capitalism in Russia out of the ruins of the USSR, would have to agree. Next is NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe. NATO was an organization that existed to defend Western Europe against the member states of the Warsaw Pact. But with the collapse of the USSR and revolutions in other Eastern European countries, its raison d'etre vanished. In conversation with Stone, Putin asserts, and some Western foreign policy professionals concede, that the United States promised that if the USSR permitted the reunification of Germany, there would be no further NATO expansion. Putin chides Gorbachev for his failure to get this down in writing. Assuming this promise was made, we can imagine Russian consternation as NATO expanded to include Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary in 1999, and then the Baltic states, Romania, and Bulgaria in 2004. Just recently, in 2020, NATO expanded again to include North Macedonia. Not unreasonably, Putin emphasizes that Russia viewed the Cold War as over and thus could not understand the purpose of such expansions. He speculates that the NATO bureaucracy took on a life of its own and needed to set up Russia as its archenemy in order to justify its continued existence. Finally, there's the recklessly cavalier attitude of the U.S. toward Russia and its security interests. Following 9/11, Putin recounts how he was the first foreign leader to call President Bush and offer support. Russia then assisted the United States with its logistical challenges in Afghanistan. Yet, on December the 13th, 2001, Bush repaid Putin by announcing America's unilateral withdrawal from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, totally ignoring Russia's opposition. Bush also proceeded with plans to set up missile defense systems in Eastern Europe, purportedly to defend Europe and the U.S. against Iran. If you were the president of the Russian Federation, would you believe this? Only Russia has missiles in that region with the range necessary to strike the United States. And as Putin correctly points out to Stone, missile defense systems can quickly be retrofitted to house offensive missiles. Putin does not want nuclear missiles on his border any more than the Kennedy administration wanted them in Cuba. There's much more in this interview, which I commend to you. Again, it's at im1776.com called Understanding of Vladimir Putin by Nathan Fisher. Let's go back to the chat. Terror Destroyer says in 2001, Iraq sought clearance for a gift of $94 million in humanitarian aid to homeless and wretched Americans living in poverty. Washington dismissed Iraq's gift as ridiculous and nonsensical. Mikhail Gorbachev, quoted by pro-commenter man, cut the population by 90%, and there aren't enough people left to do a great deal of ecological damage. Again, nobody seems to want to point out that the goal of the green parties around the world is to destroy the world economy, which would lead to a mass die-off of billions of people. The Greens hate people and want them culled. Population is a political problem. Once population is out of control, it requires authoritarian government, even fascism, to reduce it. And this is from Thomas Ferguson, U.S. State Department. The Amazon sorting Dominicans have commandeered the street and are yelling in Dominicans, as shown in 666. Who else do we have here? Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Lapdog Christopher Hitchens never exposed his Illuminati puppet masters. Well, you know, if I needed to be convinced, and I didn't really need to be convinced, that the conservatives were a hollow mockery, just their embrace of Christopher Hitchens, the communist. Why did Christopher Hitchens love George W. Bush? Well, because Hitchens was more properly a Trotskyite who believed in world revolution and saw George W. Bush as bringing revolution to the world. Matt Beck says, if you're going to talk about Ukraine, you need to admit that Steve Saylor is publishing a bunch of increasingly tasteless, ignorant, and unhinged comments. Why do you still support him? He doesn't moderate the comment section. There's a lot of pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian, pro-Putin stuff on uns.com. And, okay. Hello to G's He Style. I hope everyone is well despite the irritation from the WF. Metal Mike says, what do you think of Kissinger actually making sense on Russia? Well, for all Kissinger's sins, this is a man who has actually, done a study of history. So I'm not surprised. And let's move on. Oh, let's just see the latest from antiwar.com. Israel tells U.S. it killed Iranian colonel in Tehran. Kissinger, Ukraine must give Russia territory. Sweden, Finland selling delegations to Turkey to discuss NATO bids. Are they bringing sacks of cash with them? 80+ senators support NATO membership for Sweden and Finland. Economy bigger priority than punishing Russia, according to an AP NORC poll. Biden, no change in ambiguous Taiwan policy. Quad leaders announce new initiatives to counter China. Russia, China hold a joint air patrol in East Asia as Biden wraps up visit. And, well, at least World War III hasn't started. And again, what can one possibly make of people who are absolutely blithe about the prospect of World War III? I mean, World War III has been understood, from the time that people began using the phrase World War III as the effective destruction of the world. Yeah, we're going to blow up the world, but that'll teach those Ruskies a thing or two. So, obviously it's worth it, right? This is from Moon of Alabama. Ukraine propaganda. BBC tries to sell telegram rumors that make no sense. Do you really believe that the people are dumb enough to believe this? Russian media, retired major general killed in skies over Ukraine. Which Russian media, one might ask? Yes, every rumor from the Ukraine, pro-Zelensky side is true. Anything that Moscow says, by definition, must be false. A Russian fighter has been shot down in the skies over Ukraine, and Kanamet Batushev, a retired major general of the Russian Air Force, was killed. Source, Russian edition of BBC with reference to Botashev's 3 former subordinates. Details, subordinates who had kept in touch with Botashev after leaving the service agreed to comment on condition of anonymity for reasons of personal safety. Oh, the Russian media is in fact the Russian language site of the BBC World Service, which is financed and directed by the British government's Foreign Office. The same BBC World Service, which since March has suspended its operation and which had its website blocked in Russia. That BBC World Service will surely have reliable sources for making such nonsense claims. Russian telegram channels are anonymous and also widely used by Ukrainians. They are often unreliable. The picture above is somewhat curious too. Its resolution is too low to read the name patch of the pictured officer, who does not look like a 63-year-old retired man. The plane the Ukrainians allegedly shot down was an Su-25 ground attack aircraft. Why then is the retired Major General Batushev, should he actually exist, pictured in front of an Su-34, a supersonic fighter bomber? According to Tin Eye, the photo was first published on May 23rd by a news site in Tbilisi, Georgia. There is no metadata in the picture, and I'm unable to find any caption for it. The whole story makes absolutely no sense. It is unclear how the 63-year-old retired general found himself at the controls of an Su-25 in Ukraine. This is from the BBC. Batushev commanded a regiment of the Guards Air Base in Voronezh. His military career came to an end in June 2012 when he was accused of crashing an Su-27 fighter near Petrozavodsk. The general asked his friend colonel to let him fly an Su-27, a flight permit he did not have, unquote. Moon of Alabama concludes. So the dude was kicked out of the military. He hasn't flown military planes for 10 years. Somehow he steals an Su-25, which he probably did not know how to fly, and gets shot down over Ukraine. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Well, I mean, if we're willing to believe it, well, we're willing to believe anything, it seems, from the Ukraine. Okay, the Texas shooter, I'll have something to say about that shortly. This is from Chris Menahan at Information Liberation. America is back. Joe Biden announced Monday that the U.S. would go to war with China if they were to invade Taiwan. From Politico, when asked by a reporter if the U.S. would defend Taiwan if it were attacked by Russia, Biden responded, "Yes, that's the commitment we made. We agree with the one China policy. We've signed on to it and all the intended agreements made from there. But the idea that it could be taken by force, just taken by force, is just not appropriate," unquote. His handlers quickly rushed to put out a statement walking it back. Politico reported Monday that Biden's comments make a war more likely. Yes, a war with Russia, China, and Iran. The three-front war, which is even better than the notorious two-front war. Crazy, crazy times we live in. Oh, yes. The world needs more Canada, apparently. What that even means, I have no idea. But apparently Canada, which is now, puffing itself up as some sort of world force, which it isn't. Canada has neither the military nor the economy to be a world force. But Catherine Tunney from CBC News, just a reminder that CBC is owned by the Canadian government. Canada should rethink relationship with the United States as democratic backsliding worsens. Security experts. Former national security advisors, CSIS directors, say the U.S. could become a source of threat and instability. Yeah, maybe we should rethink our relationship with the United States and cut our own throats. And what are these CSIS experts and security experts? What do they think is going to happen in the United States? Do they think that the Tucker Carlson Totenkopf battalion is going to invade Canada? Canada's intelligence community will have to grapple with the growing influence of anti-democratic forces in the United States. This from a country which just recently declared martial law because of some trucks in Ottawa. Yes, Canada is in an excellent position to lecture the world about democracy. The United States is and will remain our closest ally, but it could become a source of threat and instability, says a newly published report written by a task force of former national security advisors, former Canadian Security Intelligence Service CSIS directors, ex-deputy ministers, former ambassadors, and academics. Members of the group have advised both Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Now is the time for the federal government to rethink how it approaches national security, the report concludes. The authors, some of whom had access to Canada's most prized secrets and briefed cabinet on emerging threats, say Canada has become complacent in its national security strategies and is not prepared to tackle threats like Russian and Chinese espionage, the democratic backsliding in the United States, a rise in cyber attacks, and climate change. You notice how they put Russian before Chinese? Russia has no footprint in Canada, no influence whatsoever. But let's pretend the convoy, the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, was a wake-up call, says advisor. Oh, a wake-up call. So it's a very serious threat to our sovereignty, to our security, in some cases to our democratic institutions. We need to rethink our relationship with the United States. Oh, I don't know, maybe Canada could ban Fox News? I suppose that would be a start, right? Maybe Canada could ban all, right-wing internet sites. How about that? This is from the Canadian Press. Justin Trudeau cancels appearance at event in BC after protesters hurl racial slurs. That definitely happened and is not at all made up. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was forced to cancel plans to attend a fundraising dinner Tuesday evening after two speakers at the event said protesters hurled racial slurs at the mostly South Asian attendees entering a convention center in Surrey, BC. South Asian in this case means Sikh, and Surrey is dominated by the Sikhs. Trudeau did not enter the building and spoke to a crowd for about 3 minutes by Zoom. He said no one should be intimidated or stopped from exercising their democratic freedoms because that's what this country is all about. Trudeau said he would return to see his supporters in Surrey in the future, and an organizer of the event told attendees they should feel free to stay and enjoy dinner. Defense Minister Anita Anand addressed the crowd, but a Liberal Party staffer asked a reporter to leave the room because that's what freedom is all about. So Anita Anand addressed the conference. And I guess, yeah, she is a Hindu, and but no one was uttering racial threats against her. The RCMP took no action. Dean Skoreko tweets, "This story is a lie. No evidence of any racist insults, and the RCMP in attendance didn't arrest anyone. Pure Trudeau propaganda again. The Canadian media is trying to start racial violence." All of those people with smartphones, which have built-in recorders, both sound and visual, and nobody had any footage of this. How very strange and how very convenient. I guess Trudeau's line now is that I am the only defense before, preventing a Nazi / Tucker Carlson takeover of Canada. Regarding martial law, Aaron Wary writes at the CBC, to understand Ottawa's use of the Emergency Act, we need to know what cabinet knew. Marco Mendicino sheds a little more light on the government's decision. As far as we know, the justification for declaring martial law in Canada was CBC stories. Again, I am not making this up. That people from CSIS and the like, and misinformation, disinformation experts speak to reporters. Reporters put these lies into print, and then the government says, "Well, see, it's legit because it's on the CBC, it's on Global News." This is from Politico. Conservative frontrunner deploys populist strike on Ottawa's elites. Pierre Poilievre is a career politician who has made his name as a rabble-rouser. Now on the hunt to become Canada's next PM, he's doubling down. Yes, he wants to make Canada the freest country on earth. How exactly he is going to do this remains a mystery. The right of center conservatives, and who wrote this story, by the way? Andy Blatchford. The right of center conservatives and the country in general have shied away from a sweeping embrace of the kind of populism Poilievre is pitching to the masses. Unlike other Western democracies that have been flirting with nativist demagogues, Canadian voters have continued to elect moderate governments closer to the middle of the spectrum. Yes, the middle of the spectrum, which means that, prostitution has been legalized by the Supreme Court. Physician-assisted death has been legalized by the Supreme Court. And the Canadian government not only celebrates the sexual mutilation of children, but has passed a law where anyone, including parents who counsel against this, can be imprisoned. That's what counts as moderate in my country. I don't want the state to run people's lives anymore. I want them to be masters of their own destiny, Poilievre told Jordan Peterson last week. Poilievre has no difficulty at all with this country being subsumed by radically different foreigners. That's the biggest question in Canada, the national question, whether Canada, as it has been known, will continue to exist. And Pierre Poilievre is a firm supporter of Canada as we have known it ceasing to exist. Let's go back to who I've neglected for the first 2 days of this week. and his the collapse of complex societies. And he's talking about the collapse of Maya civilization. There is evidence across the southern lowlands for continued population growth during the Classic period, reaching a peak at different times in the late Classic in various localities. Late Classic population levels, despite agricultural intensification, were apparently approaching an upper limitation, for the earlier pattern of exponential growth was beginning to level off. Cowgill argues that there was little growth in the lowlands after 550 AD, while R.E.W. Adams, agreeing with the pattern, would push the date of growth cessation forward to about 650. Focusing on patterns in individual localities, Cuthbert observes that in some parts of the southern lowlands, population peaked between 600 and 700 AD. The Tepu I ceramic period, while elsewhere it peaked between 700 and 830. Tikal and Yacha reached maximum population in the late Classic Cybele and Altar de Sacrifios in the terminal Classic period. Apart from the major political centers, there was also a late peak among the rural population of the Belize Valley. Tikal is the most intensively studied of the Mayan centers. The most densely occupied, central 16 square kilometers of the site may have had a peak late Classic period population of 10,000 to 11,000. The periphery of Tikal, bounded by swamps on the east and west and earthworks on north and south, was home to another 39,000, for a total population of 49,000. Haviland notes that this figure compares closely to the estimate of about 50,000 for ancient Sumerian cities. For the entire southern lowlands, Culbert projects an average of about 200 persons per square kilometer, and notes this would make the lowlands one of the most densely populated areas of the pre-industrial world. The population density of Tikal was about 350 to 400 per square kilometer, while Swidden agriculture would have been able to support only 30 to 60 per square kilometer. Several investigators have concluded from such figures that slash and burn farming was incapable of sustaining much of the population. Harrison, for example, estimates that from 61 to 74% of the Tikal population must have been supported by other means. The question of how lowland populations were supported is thus of considerable importance. Research in the lowlands over the past few years has revealed a widespread complex of features reflecting intensive agriculture. Intensive agricultural methods were relatively permanent and organized, and included at least the following techniques: A, canalization and draining of river margins and bajo swamps to create raised and channeled fields; B, water channeling and storage; and C, terracing of both steep and shallow hill slopes to direct drainage, trap silt, and create fertile areas; and D, a variety of miscellaneous features. These techniques have been found in various areas across the lowlands. Raised field systems and associated canals provide dry, cultivatable land in areas otherwise subject to inundation. This includes lakes and lagoons, river margins, and primarily bajos. Other benefits of raised field canals would be fish propagation in the canals between fields, maintenance of a moist root-level soil environment, fertilization of fields with organically rich soil derived from canal bottoms, and use of canals for transporting crops. With fertilization from canal bottoms, these fields could have supported continuous cropping, although it is uncertain whether this was done. Most raised field systems have been discerned through aerial photography. Ground checking has regularly confirmed the observations made on the aerial imagery, and with the passage of time, more and more areas of the lowlands have been shown to have such remains. Recent work by Adams involved radar mapping of about one half of the southern lowlands. Adams' results lead him to estimate that between 1,250 and 2,500 square kilometers of the lowlands were modified by canals. Such figures compare impressively with the 120 square kilometers of the famous Aztec canals of the Valley of Mexico, which were similar in nature and function. Drained, modified, and intensively cultivated swamps, suggests Adams, may have been the most valuable land by the late Classic period. There is a notable association between swamps and the larger sites. Tikal, significantly, had the largest quantity of readily available swamp of any major center. Raised field complexes date as early as circa 1100 BC, as well as to the late pre-Classic period. With the population maximum that was reached in the late Classic, raised field cultivation was at its height in this period. Water channeling and storage involved a variety of techniques, some of which were only partially related to agricultural, but which were all characteristically labor intensive. The lowlands as a whole are deficient in surface water, particularly during the dry season. The Maya dealt with this by constructing canals, dams, reservoirs, and small wells, and by altering cenotes, large limestone sinkholes. In some areas, hydraulic engineering reached major levels. Reservoirs are common in the Rio Bec area. At the West Yucatan site of Etzna, a water control system consisting of a moat, canal, and reservoir complex was designed to collect and store rainwater for agriculture, human consumption, and defense. The volume of earth moved for this complex, begun in the late pre-classic, made its construction as large an undertaking as the pyramids of the sun and the moon at Teotihuacan. A major late pre-classic canal system was also built, as noted above, at the site of Soros in northern Belize. Canal systems that were probably used for water transportation have been documented along the Rio Candelaria. Hundreds of narrow, 3 to 10 meters wide, short, 1 to 2 kilometer canals have been recorded. Matheny's calculations on the volume of earth moved to create the 180 kilometers of documented canals suggest that 500,000 labor days are represented. The 10 million cubic meters of material excavated is 10 times the volume of the pyramid of the sun. And I will have more from Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Society tomorrow. And, oh, yes, let's get back to the Sikhs. According to Wikipedia, Canadian Sikhs number roughly 500,000 people and account for roughly 1.4% of Canada's population. The largest Sikh populations in Canada are found in British Columbia, followed by Ontario and then Alberta. However, Sikh can be found in every province and territory. As of the 2011 census, more than half of Canada's Sikhs can be found in one of 4 cities: Surrey, 105,000; Brampton, 98,000. Keep in mind that Patrick Brown is the mayor of Brampton. In Calgary, 28,600; and Abbotsford, 26,000. British Columbia holds the distinction of being the only province and one of the few jurisdictions outside of South Asia with Sikhism as the second most followed religion among the population. Keep in mind that Sikhs, well, when the new census comes out, they will be higher than 1.4% of Canada's population, but the Sikhs dominate all political parties in Canada. I'm not exaggerating. And what is one to make of that? Whoever wins the race for new leader of the Conservative Party Canada will win because he has signed up the most Sikhs. This happens again and again, as I say, in every party. The new leader of the BC Liberal Party, Kevin Falcon, won because of his creation of a phantom Sikh army. And when other candidates complained about this, they were accused of racism. In the battle to succeed Jean Chrétien as leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister, Alan Rock, one of the candidates, was angry because Paul Martin had swooped in and created his own phantom Sikh army, and there were no Sikhs left, even made up ones or dead ones. So with that in mind, let's go to this article from the site Immigration Watch. Do Canadians really want every April to be Sikh Heritage Month? Most Canadians are completely unaware that Canada's Parliament passed a motion in 2019 to make every April Sikh Heritage Month. The one big question many Canadians probably ask is this: what have the Sikhs done to deserve a whole month being set aside for them? Disgracefully worse, no MPs abstained or voted against the motion. Ironically, the behavior of some of the earliest Sikhs to arrive in Canada aboard a Japanese-named ship called the Panama Maru in 1913 was a foreshadowing and a warning of massive Sikh abuse of Canada's immigration laws. It demonstrated Sikh willingness to use fraudulent documents. It also showed their arrogant attitude. They believed that they had a right to enter Canada and that Canada had no right to oppose their entry. There are many honest and humble Sikhs, but many others also believe they have a right to enter Canada and that Canada is obligated to take them. The Panama Maru incident in 1913 also helps to explain much of what happened in the much larger Kamagatu Maru incident in 1914. Today, Sikhs repeatedly use the Kamagatu Maru event to proclaim that they were victims and that Canada has to atone to them by removing all barriers to Sikh immigration. In their whining, They omit many facts, including the uncomfortable fact that they assassinated a Canadian immigration agent who had opposed them in 1914. They also omit the extremely important fact that Gurdit Singh, the leader of the Kamagatu Maru expedition, boasted that if he succeeded in landing the 300 plus Kamagatu Maru passengers at Vancouver, he would bring 25,000 more Sikhs soon after. This threat alarmed Canadians in 1914 because if it were to come true, it would have greatly changed Vancouver's entire cultural makeup. To show some context, consider this. Around 1914, the city of Vancouver had a population of about 60,000. Here are some details of the Panama Maru incident of 1913. The ship called the Panama Maru carried 56 East Indians to Canada. Most of the passengers on that ship had not lived in Canada previously, but falsely claimed that they had. They produced fake money order receipts, time cards, etc. in order to enter Canada. Immigration authorities allowed 17, those physically recognized to have been here before, to land, but they detained 39 of the 56. A board of inquiry looked into the case and ordered that the 39 be deported. However, litigious East Indians in Canada determined to make the Panama Maru case a test case, which, if won, would open Canada's border to a flood of Sikhs and other East Indians. The lawyer for the East Indians, J. Edward Bird, appeared before Justice Dennis Murphy, the author of a royal commission which had investigated Chinese immigration fraud. He ruled against the East Indians. Undaunted, Bird then went to Chief Justice Gordon Hunter, who was notorious for appearing drunk in court and who was a clear embarrassment to the government. Hunter allowed the 39 to stay. Worse still, 4 of the 39 who had been ordered deported for medical reasons escaped from detention and could not be found. After this humiliating incident, Canadian immigration authorities undoubtedly resolved not to let the Sikhs humiliate them again, particularly those that arrived on the Kamagatu Maru months later. Although many years of Sikh immigration peace followed, the Singh decision, that's the Supreme Court Singh decision of 1985, changed that and signaled the beginning of runaway Sikh-caused refugee and immigration chaos in Canada. Between 1977 and 1981, 6 citizens of India, all Sikhs with the surname Singh, plus a Guyanese citizen of Indian heritage, made separate refugee claims in Canada. This should have been seen as another warning. In making their claims, the Sikhs continued a Sikh pattern of using litigation to break down any barriers to Sikh entry. Initially, all 7 were denied entry, but they used a loophole in Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, particularly the definition of the word everyone, to include non-Canadians such as them, and remained in Canada. In doing so, they turned Canada's refugee system into a quasi-judicial body, which soon became mired in tens of thousands of claims, most of them illegitimate. The most serious sin the Sikhs have committed in Canada was their bombing of Air India Flight 182. This resulted in the murder of 329 people. This was the largest mass murder in Canadian history. In fact, it is also the only thing that many Canadians think of when they hear the word Sikh. Almost all of the Sikhs involved in that murder have not been punished, and I'll add that many of them are hailed as heroes by Sikhs, well, particularly in Surrey, BC. The damage the Sikhs have done to Canada does not stop there. The cost of refugee claims since the Singh decision has increased dramatically into the billions. That alone should have moved many MPs either to abstain in the voting for Sikh Heritage Month or to vote outrightly against proclaiming April Sikh Heritage Month. But disgracefully, it did not do either. So the Kamagatu Maru is apparently one of Canada's greatest sins, and Stephen Harper issued a groveling apology for this, in effect saying that Canada is open to the whole world, which is in fact what Justin Trudeau said after he became Prime Minister. Come on in. We got plenty of room. Now, you're not going to want to live in frozen wasteland, and you're going to end up, likely in suburban BC or suburban Toronto or suburban Calgary, thus part of the process, which is making housing increasingly unaffordable to ordinary Canadians. But Pierre Poilievre rails against high house prices, but supports the importation of 450,000 permanent new residents every year. Yeah. In the Singh decision, the Supreme Court ruled that Canada could not turn back anyone attempting to enter Canada through Canadian waters. If they were in Canadian waters, then they had to go through the immigration system or the refugee system. This is how it works. That people go before a hearing. They're given money. They're given money, lots of money, while they wait. And then there's a hearing, and then they typically tell outrageous lies. Sometimes they are denied, in which case they can have an appeal or they can take it to court. And once people show up in my country, it is almost impossible to get rid of them. To my mind, there is no possibility of a return to liberty in Canada without the abrogation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the destruction of Canada's court system as we know it. Here's news from another British colony. South Australia has gone mad. Yes, we're going to have zero COVID here. And somehow that didn't work out, just like it didn't work out in New Zealand. This is from Levy Parsons at the Daily Mail. Anyone found breaching COVID rules in South Australia could be punished with 2 years jail, as new laws are set to sail through state parliament this week. Labor Premier Peter Malinauskas orchestrated a shock crossbench deal with support from the Greens and SA Best, but the opposition and civil liberty groups have voiced their fury at the move. Labor did a quick backroom deal because Peter Malinauskas is desperate to have the power to lock up people and dish out huge COVID-19 fines at the drop of a hat, a Liberal Party spokesperson told the Adelaide Advertiser. Under the public health legislation, individuals who breach isolation requirements or ignore vaccination mandates and mask rules in high-risk settings, such as hospitals or nursing homes, can be fined $20,000 or face 2 years in prison. Businesses found to be breaking these rules can be hit with a massive $75,000 fine. And as always, I'm reminded of Clive James, famous Australian, one of the most famous, who said that the problem with Australia is not that we are a nation of convicts, but that we are a nation of jailers. And, oh, well, here's some good news. This is from the Star News Network. According to a recent survey, over 1.2 million students have abandoned public schools in favor of other alternatives in the aftermath of the coronavirus pandemic, where many public schools shut down in-person learning in favor of remote learning. The Daily Caller reports that the survey, conducted by the American Enterprise Institute, discovered that over 1,268,000 students have fled public schooling since March 2020. Enrollment initially fell by 2.5% in the fall 2020 semester when lockdowns first began in the spring of that year. The following year, schools that returned to in-person learning restored some of those numbers, while the schools that remained on virtual learning continued to see steep declines. Schools that maintained the virtual learning method saw enrollment drop by another 1.2% in 2021 to 2022, amounting to a net loss of 1 out of every 22 students since 2020. By contrast, districts that resumed normal learning saw a recovery rate of about 0.9%, or a net loss of just 1 out of every 93 students. The study also found that the drops in enrollment were higher among the lower grades. Remote school districts saw an average decline of about 8.1% in kindergarten students, a 6.2% decrease in elementary students, and a 2.6% drop in middle school students. Yes, what's the point of going to school? Or you can just stare at a screen. I mean, no one seemed to ask the question, well, if everyone could just stare at a screen, then why do we need all these to spend this enormous amount of money to build and maintain schools? Why do we need so many teachers? Because one teacher at a computer can communicate with an awful lot of students. Monkeypox is up next, and Eugippius has another post about this. WHO advisor, World Health Organization, monkeypox is not a sexually transmitted disease because reasons. We are ruled by ridiculous and deeply unserious people. And there's a picture here of Andy Seal, described as virus idiot. Some random WHO advisor and global news, aka the CSIS News Network, want you to know that monkeypox could spread through sexual contact, but it's not an STI. Quote, while the world is seeing some cases among that group, anyone can get monkeypox through close contact with an infected person, said Andy Searle, an advisor to the WHO's global HIV, hepatitis, and STIs programs. Quote, it seems clear that this is linked to close contact. That could be through social contact, possibly through sexual contact, which of course is close contact, but we're still in the early days of this outbreak, so there's a lot we're still learning, unquote. We're seeing some cases among men who have sex with men, and this is not a gay disease, as some people on social media, have attempted to label it. Anybody can contract monkeypox through close contact. The world also needs to know that monkeypox is not a sexually transmitted infection, Seal added. You can get a cough or cold through sexual contact, but that doesn't mean it's a sexually transmitted disease. Typically, you need the exchange of certain fluids that has an element of contagion to it to transmit the disease. The difference is that a sexually transmitted infection is caused by sexual intercourse, another kind of intercourse, and another kind of sex, unquote. Eugippius comments, this is such stupid sophistry. I feel dumb even replying. Molluscum contagiosum is a classic STD that spreads via close skin contact. Human papillovirus exploits mucous membranes just like monkeypox. STDs are just infections with a primarily sexual transmission vector with or without the help of venereal fluids, like monkeypox right now. But I mean, stigma is bad, though. Quote, as cases began to be identified in men who have sex with men, health officials urged the public not to rush to conclusions, as monkeypox is not exclusive to one certain group. Angela Rasmussen, a virologist with the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization at the University of Saskatchewan, told Global News, quote, the community of men who have sex with men has been historically incredibly stigmatized with relation to virus infection. So I want to be very careful to say that that link has not been finalized yet. Do you remember the figures I quoted from California on the astonishing prevalence of gonorrhea and syphilis among male homosexuals? Eugippius comments, the reason that this is so infuriating is that these are the very same irredeemable assholes who spent 2 years condemning small children to months of social isolation, demanding seasonal nationwide house arrests, making everyone wear diapers on their faces, restricting most aspects of public life, and forcing unwanted medical interventions upon millions, all because SARS-2 is super dangerous and we need to reduce the spread. Now that monkeypox has found a new transmission vector in gay male sexual practices, the real problem is historical, the stigmatization. Young people who attend parties during the Corona era, murderers guilty of massacring old people. Gay men who transmit monkeypox via gay sex, a deeply complex moral problem that calls us all not only to introspection, but also to an awareness of our individual ongoing complicity in the marginalization of gay men and other minoritized communities and peoples. Even if monkeypox spreads to every last sex with other males having male on the planet, at no point will anybody anywhere ever turn to their beloved and super effective non-pharmaceutical interventions. There will be no 15-day gay sex hiatus to crush the curve. That's not how this works. Yes, there are certain people in certain classes who are approved, applauded, advanced, and there are others, as someone pointed out on Twitter, like these people dying of fentanyl. Let's give them more drugs. We need to kill off all of these people. Let's go to Alex Berenson's Substack. And the tremendous rise of mass shootings in the United States is of course very distressing. Why is this happening? Well, Marshall McLuhan understood why this is happening. He said that it has to do with identity and the loss of identity, that violence is the search for meaning. Yes, here's a quote from Marshall McLuhan. When deprived of his identity, man becomes violent in diverse ways. Violence is the quest for identity. Our societies are devoted to the destruction of identity through consumerism, drugs, obesity, all manner of things. Identity is suspicious because people with identities could decide, oh, we're not going to allow a bunch of so-called experts to ruin our lives. And I think this is what it comes down to. Alex Berenson writes, cannabis causes psychosis, psychosis causes violence. Yep, there it is, the first reference to cannabis use by Salvador Ramos, the Texas elementary school killer, in the New York Times. Took 24 hours, give or take. And Ms. Rodriguez recalled that he would often talk about how much he despised his mother and grandmother, whom he told her did not let him smoke weed or do what he wanted. This is the only case, except it's not. Nicholas Cruz, the Florida high school shooter, was a heavy user and told the police detective who interviewed him that he heard voices. Devin Patrick Kelly, who shot up a Texas church and killed 26 people in 2017 before blowing his head off, had THC in his system when he died. Kelly had anti-anxiety drugs too. A lot of heavy cannabis users wind up using Xanax or Klonopin to try to tamp down their paranoia. Darrell Brooks Jr., last seen allegedly racing through the Waukesha Christmas parade, is a self-described stoner. Meanwhile, cities like Portland, Oregon have suffered an explosion in violence following the legalization of cannabis. Portland had 16 murders in 2013 before the voters in Oregon approved a full legislation. Last year, it had 90. It's on pace to have even more in 2022. It has gone from being one of the safest medium-sized cities in the United States to one of the most dangerous. Denver has seen a similar trend. And there's an excerpt here from a story, March 14th of this year. Denver records highest number of homicides since 1981, again, as arguments, domestic violence, drugs fueled killing. And Berenson concludes, obviously, the legalization of cannabis is not the only or even the main driver of this new American violence wave. Broader criminal justice reform and the way Democratic politicians have undercut and discouraged the police are probably even larger factors, but its role is increasingly obvious to anyone who cares to look. Cannabis causes psychosis, and psychosis causes violence. Yes. Cannabis induces schizophrenia and a disease, schizophreniform, it's called. And schizophrenics are 18 times more likely to murder someone than non-schizophrenics. So it would seem to be, fairly obvious that we would like as few people as possible to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. But no, we have to eliminate the stigma. We're beaten over the head with this. Oh, there's a stigma against people who have schizophrenia. Why might that be? Because of their well-documented history of violence? Because people don't like other people around them who say crazy things nonstop? But going back to what I was saying, the stigmatization of, gay males. And again, I'll repeat this. This is California data. Compared to other groups, gay and bisexual men have early syphilis rates that are 248 times higher than other males and 554 times higher than females. Why people that associate homosexual men with disease, golly, I just can't imagine why that might be. It's a real puzzler, And let's go to dailyskeptic.org. And let's see. There is no doubt this is hysteria. It fills the newspaper inches. Carol Sikora, talking to Dan Wooten to discuss the media's hysterical coverage of monkeypox, and says the complete overreaction is a sign of the times and a reflection of the fear inspired by coronavirus. Government fear propaganda made COVID worse, says report. A new inquiry by the charity Sense About Science has concluded that the government's, that would be the English government's, top-down attitude to the pandemic and simplistic and exaggerated messaging hindered the public's ability to respond and caused unnecessary harm. By focusing on such paternalistic messaging, the government at times misled the public, for example, leading people to believe that their risk of infection was higher than it actually was. The inquiry notes this is particularly true of children and the young. In an attempt to increase compliance with the rules, even after evidence had showed a huge disparity in risk for different age groups, the government continued to imply that COVID didn't discriminate. This meant that groups at lower risk, such as children, were subject to stringent, harmful restrictions, the impact of which could have been reduced or avoided. It also meant that resources weren't adequately allocated to those who were most at risk. As such, there was a failure to consider the cost of different interventions, which should be standard practice for policy decisions. I'm going to ask you, viewers, listeners, to look back 2 years to the beginning of the hysteria. Remember when we were told that we had to wash our hands, 20, 30, 40, 50 times a day? Remember when we were told to stop touching your face? Remember when we were told that surfaces, that the coronavirus could live on surfaces for up to 9 days, which, if true, would have meant that everyone in the world would quickly have been infected by the coronavirus. I can say, remember the enormously long lineups, stores, drugstores, grocery stores, and the absurd in malls. People who are moving this way have to stay on this side, and people who are moving the other way have to stay on this side, with people watching to see if you're walking the wrong way. Remember the stickers, the circular stickers put in stores? Stand here. And also, don't move down this aisle in that direction. I also remember personally walking down Fort Street in Victoria to the grocery store. And I remember people seeing that I have gray hair actually walking out into a busy highway to avoid passing me by. Because, if I come into close contact for the briefest period of time next to an old person, well, then I'm going to die. These people need to be punished. Everyone responsible for this. Forcing Russia to default on its debt will backfire as only Western investors will be affected. Sounds like a win-win to me. The government's growing list of non-persons whom internet companies are required to censor. There has been much discussion about the censorship implications of the government's online safety bill, but government censorship of the internet is already happening now under existing legislation. Since late April, the website of RT, Russia Today, has been blocked, as well as RT accounts on social media. Regardless of your views on RT, Ukraine, or Russia, the way this censorship has been applied should disturb us all. On April 27th, the Russian sanctions EU exit amendment regulations were issued by the Foreign Secretary Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss. They came into effect April 29th. The power to make these regulations was granted by the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2018. Yes, money laundering. Such a threat, certainly a threat to my country, such as when I go to pay my internet bill, I get asked what my father's middle name was. Because, $111 a month, boy, that is really going to rack up into a huge laundered sum, apparently. These new regulations place a requirement on internet service providers to take reasonable steps to prevent a user of the service in the United Kingdom from accessing, by means of that service, an internet service provided by a designated person. In other words, they force our ISPs to block websites run by designated persons. And who is a designated person? It is simply somebody designated by the Secretary of State as being on the Russia sanctions list. In the same week as his brutal invasion gaffe, Bush falls victim to Russian pranksters. Unfortunately for the gaffe-prone former president, he can't catch a break. Footage has now emerged of him being prank called by two notorious Russian pranksters, Vladimir Kuznetsov and Alexei Stolyarov. Some of their previous antics were covered in 2016 by The Guardian. In the phone call, someone posing as Ukraine's president, Vladimir Zelensky, asks Bush, you know that narrative in the early 90s, Secretary of State Baker promised Gorbachev not to expand NATO, but this would be completely wrong, especially with the threats that Russia poses now? Bush responds, yeah, that's right. Listen, things change. Baker, he was the Secretary of State for my dad, which was years ago. And so the United States must be flexible, adjusting to the times. And that's why you're finding such strong support for your country now. Many commentators have interpreted this as an admission by Bush that Baker did promise Gorbachev that NATO would not expand. And it certainly looks that way. And Toby Young writes, why I fear this censor's charter. I've written the cover story for the June issue of The Critic, setting out my concerns about the online safety bill. In essence, it's a gold embossed invitation to woke activists to censor the speech of their political opponents in the name of protecting vulnerable people from so-called harm. Why a conservative government with an 80-seat majority is handing this weapon to its enemies is a mystery. I don't know that it's that much of a mystery, because we've learned recently that politicians have become very sensitive souls, and they simply cannot handle criticism. We're the best people working as hard as we can to make everyone's lives better, but people keep saying mean things about this. They would be perfectly happy if all criticism of government, well, and judges for the like, was made illegal, perhaps an offense for which one can be imprisoned. Deaths have increased cumulatively. BBC producers' asinine defense of false extreme weather claim. When I was young, I was taught something about science, that you have a theory, or even before that, that the more that it attempts to explain, the less useful it is. But apparently, climate change is a unified theory that explains everything that happens in the world. Yeah. And let's go, well, I'll go to the chat. I have more to say about the climate extremists. Again, the Green Party, well, they have an alliance with the left. What is it called? Die Linke in Germany, I believe. 25% of the people of Germany voting for parties which want to destroy Germany, not just Germany, but the world. Sobering it is. Let's see. Who else? Who do we have here? I have very little sympathy for those still acting out these absurd rituals. I actually detest them, says Chokakin 6. Don Willis, speaking of gay issues, Anita Bryant in her orange juice commercials, she was fired, yes, the initial shots in the alphabet people culture wars. The way to keep pot from driving you insane is to drink beer and smoke cigarettes when you get stoned, says strategically adaptive meme plagues. I'll tell you a story. When I was in grade 10, I was in an acting class when most of the other students were in grade 12, 2 years older. I got friendly with these people. And one fellow I was friendly with, 2 years older, his name was Lloyd. And I don't know, we were talking about things, and he started talking about marijuana. And he told me that he used to smoke marijuana. Keep in mind that he's like 17 years old, that he used to smoke marijuana, but he'd stopped. And I asked him why he stopped. And he said, because of the paranoia. He said, I would get stoned and I couldn't get this feeling out of my head that the whole world was watching me and the whole world was judging me. And the whole world thought that I was, stupid or ugly and that nobody liked me. He said, so that's why I stopped smoking marijuana. Quachalango says, getting rid of autocorrect tonight. I don't know that I've never had much occasion to use autocorrect. I send almost no messages uh, through my phone. Usually I don't take my phone when I go anywhere. This was even before I learned that the government was tracking us, everybody, with a cell phone because of the corona doom. And I don't, my tweets are not composed on a phone. I see people complaining about this, the autocorrect, and what it's done to their tweets. And I think, well, then why don't you stop using your phone? Gamma says, I haven't stopped touching my face ever since. Oh, yes. Do you remember this? That coronavirus enters through the eyes. Oh, my God. That was a panic, too. So should we bandage our eyes so the deadly coronavirus could not get through? Also, people wearing masks outdoors to this day. And do they think that, that the three stooges of the coronavirus are lurking, around a hydro pole or a telephone pole, and they see someone walking down the street and they say, get them, boys. I'll go for the eyes. I'll go for the nose. I'll go for the mouth. They think that that's how it works. Again, they have no idea of how vast the atmosphere is and how quickly things dissipate in the atmosphere. For instance, see someone smoking a cigarette or a cigar, and they blow out smoke, and within a second or two, it's gone. It's gone. Does Buddy only listen to KMG on game day, asks Helper. I can't say. Who else? Korean food is underrated, says Don Willis. There was a Korean food stall in the building where I worked at BC Report, and it was right by the elevator. And, I'd go into the elevator. Oh, my God, what is that? I think I'm going to pass out. Oh, it's the Korean food place. You should try the kimchi. It's great. No, I don't think I want to try the kimchi. Don Willis says, can we now talk about our love for a certain English musical god? Who would that be? Who would that be? Bad credit score in China for low phone usage, KMG, says Quachulango. I'll keep that in mind. I have no desire whatsoever to visit China even once. I'd be interested in going to Japan, though. Let's see. Something Gameston says they legit tried to push goggles and people forgot that, I think. I always like the suggestion of sewing people's mouths shut with a needle and thread. Yes, I made that suggestion as well. I mean, you seal up the lips, and then you only have to worry about the nose, right? Strategically adaptive memeplex says sacrifice and altruism are human instincts that lead to blissful feelings. We might have to throw ourselves into the jaws of the lion. Okay. People quoting lyrics. Oh, Shock the Monkey, Peter Gabriel. Okay. I like Peter Gabriel. I liked him in Genesis, and I liked his first 3 or 4 solo albums. And then he went full WOMAD or whatever it's called. He became a guru figure. And it is not good for people, particularly musicians, to become guru figures. Don Willis writes, keep humans from having sex, keep humans isolated, break will of humans, program humans, dispose of humans. This body contact business, okay, I don't want to be too graphic, but the most popular form of coitus is called the missionary position, which results in full body contact from tip to toe. And so where are all these heterosexual cases of monkeypox then? Okay. I dropped into Canada on Google Maps the other day and I saw some monstrous human rights museum. It looked like a Frank Gehry thing. It was appropriate. I felt it looked that way, like a big tumor. Yes, that's in Winnipeg. The Scold in the Cold, I call it. It's a curious story that Canada has a national Holocaust museum, which is built for and maintained by the government, notwithstanding the fact that the Holocaust did not happen in Canada and did not happen to Canadians. Izzy Asper, or Israel Asper, I interviewed him once. Delightful conversationalist. He told me a very amusing story that I couldn't use on the air. for reasons of defamation. But, that was his way of ingratiating himself to reporters. And it worked. It worked with me. It's very easy to get on the good side of reporters. You just flatter them. Anyway, the Asper family from Winnipeg, they owned newspapers? They bought out Conrad Black and his vast holdings of newspapers across Canada. They also formed a television network. And the Asper family got it in their head that they were going to build a museum of human rights. Now, obviously, no one is going to go to that museum. So private money was solicited, and the Aspers put up some of their own fortune. Then they got the government, well, first the Liberal government and then the Conservative government, to pay for the completion of the museum. And then they got the government to pay to have school children bussed into the Scold in the cold, because no one is going to want to go to the Museum of Human Rights. And it is indeed, as Prince Charles would say, a monstrous carbuncle. I always had the sense the government were tracking cell phones. It was easy to do, and data is addictive, says G's He Style. Jay Leno has a funny bit about that. The scenes you see in movies and TV shows where they're, keep him on the line so we can identify where he's calling. And then, nope, guy shakes his head, nope, we lost him. And he said, they're still doing this, even though the government is tracking you all the time through your phone. LOLTY for the background on the Human Rights Museum, says David the Gnome. Guruhood was Sting's downfall, says Hauper. It's quite arguable. Quite arguable. Okay. People complain, Twitter, how come we don't have an edit function? Well, I can solve that mystery. The reason that Twitter doesn't have an edit function is that people can go back and shift the meaning. They can shift it 180 degrees of what they said and then claim, well, I don't know what you're saying because here's the tweet and that's what it says. So that's why Twitter does not have an edit function. I would prefer if Twitter had a function where it identified words that seem to be misspelled. That would be very useful to me because when I tweet, I'm constantly Googling or wikiing people's names, places, all sorts of things, the spelling of difficult words. So this is from Mary Margaret Olahan at the Daily Wire. Nancy Pelosi responds to her Archbishop's communion ban. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, publicly addressed for the first time Tuesday her Archbishop banning her from communion, criticizing San Francisco Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone for standing by the Catholic Church's positions on alphabet people issues. MSNBC's Joe Scarborough referenced the biblical Gospel of Matthew as he defended Pelosi in his introduction. Rage intensifying. Yeah, I never talk about religion. It's all a bunch of nonsense. But since I'm defending the killing of unborn babies, I'll drag Jesus into it. Claiming that Jesus Christ never discussed abortion. People who say this kind of thing, oh, Jesus Christ never discussed homosexuality. These people are idiots, okay? The Gospels are not a laundry list of rules. There is all manner of things that Jesus said, in addition, that we don't know about, because the Gospel covers Jesus up to the age of 12, and then there's an 18-year gap. And then he's covered from approximately the age of 30 to his death, 3 years later. The Bible, certainly the New Testament, is not like the Quran. The Quran is meant to be comprehensive, and the New Testament is not meant to be comprehensive. But going back to Joe Scarborough, he told his disciples that they would be welcomed into the kingdom if they, quote, lead with forgiveness and love, unquote. Again, rage intensifying. Yes. Do you know why we kill unborn babies? Because we love them. Pelosi thanked him for this reference as she weighed in on the Catholic Church's stance on abortion. This is not just about terminating a pregnancy, Pelosi said. She's an old woman. They don't talk about terminating pregnancies anymore because it reminds people of that famous Vietnam euphemism, terminating with extreme prejudice. You mean killing someone, right? Quote, these same people are against contraception, family planning, in vitro fertilization. It's a blanket thing. They use abortion as the front man for it while they try to undo so much. That's what they tried to do in the Affordable Care Act, which didn't have anything about terminating an abortion, a pregnancy. We just have to be prayerful. We have to be respectful. I come from a largely pro-life Italian-American Catholic family, so I respect other people's views about that, but I don't respect us foisting it on others. You know, there's some libertarians out there that think that blackmail should be legal. It's an exchange of services. I agree not to speak about something, and in exchange, you give me money. But we have decided that this is immoral, such that there are severe penalties against blackmail. The law is largely us foisting moral views on others. What else could it be? Oh, but everyone agrees that such and such a thing is wrong. No, not true. Not true at all. In vitro fertilization, it's just so disgusting. People talking about, oh, yes, we lost these embryos. Oh, and freezing embryos. The creation of human life it's not a gag. Well, it shouldn't be anyway. Pelosi then specifically referenced Cordileone. Quote, now our Archbishop has been vehemently against alphabet people rights too. Yes, let's bring these together, abortion and alphabet people, the culture of death. In fact, he led the way in some of the initiatives on an initiative on the ballot in California. So this decision, taking us to privacy and precedent, is very dangerous in the lives of so many of the American people. And guess who supported vociferously our most basic rights being stripped from us during the Corona Doom hysteria? Why, that would be Nancy Pelosi. Oh, but that was different. How is it different? Despite Cordileone's Friday letter informing Pelosi that she no longer received communion over her ongoing and public support for abortion, the California Democrat attended Mass on Sunday at Holy Trinity Parish in Georgetown. Video footage from a live stream viewed by the Daily Wire shows her receiving communion from a Eucharistic minister rather than the priest. I'll have to explain this to people who are not Catholics. The number of practicing Catholics has plummeted since the Second Vatican Council. But the Second Vatican Council, we need to involve the laity more. And so instead of, a priest or priests handing out communion, although they still do, we get a bunch of busybodies, which are mostly middle-aged and elderly women. Oh, women aren't allowed to be priests, but who's giving out the communion wafers? Huh? I just make it a habit of insisting on taking communion from a priest and not a middle-aged busybody. Apparently, the Archdiocese, I think it's of Arlington, which contains Washington, D.C., reacted angrily to requests to comments on Pelosi. Yeah, well, we're not going to say anything about that. These jerks keep calling us. An email was sent to the wrong person. A news outlet asked for comment, and in response, they received a rather surprising email. Who do these jerks think they are? They think this office has to answer any questions? Well, it's a pretty important question. There's a problem that crusading, if you like, of politicians, or politicians who say that, things have gone to hell. The problem that they have, because so many of these people are always saying about, someone like Pierre Poilievre is going to, Canada is the greatest country on earth. Well, if Canada is the greatest country on earth, why are you constantly telling us how bad it is? And I'm reminded of this story, Greg Wilson from the Daily Wire. Stacey Abrams is running to be governor of the worst state in the country, according to her. The Democrat, who is hurtling toward a rematch with Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who defeated her 4 years ago in an election she never conceded, made the shocking statement Saturday night at the Gwinnett Democrats' Bluetopia Gala in Norcross. I am tired of hearing about how we're the best state in the country to do business when we are the worst state in the country to live, unquote, Abrams told the Peach State Party faithful. Abrams, who immediately acknowledged that her opponents could use the statement against her, was reacting to Georgia Republicans' long-running claim that the state is the best in the nation for doing business. She then listed several categories in which the state does not stack up well. Quote, let me contextualize. When you're number 48 for mental health, when we're number 1 for maternal mortality, when you have an incarceration rate that is on the rise and wages are on the decline, then you are not the number 1 place to live. When you're number 48 for mental health, I really, how is that possible to quantify? Number 1 for maternal mortality, there is a reason why Georgia is number 1 for maternal mortality and is a demographic region that Stacey Abrams does not want to get into that question. When you have an incarceration rate that is on the rise, golly, I wonder why that might be, and wages are on the decline. Well, if you're looking for the state that has the worst gap between poor people and rich people, why, that would be California. Brian Kemp doesn't care about our families, or else he would be doing more to make sure that they were taken care of. Instead, in the midst of COVID, he passed a law to protect our companies, but he did nothing to protect our communities. Oh, okay. Why? By locking everyone up forever? By forcing people to get vaccines, which even CNN is now reporting do not stop people from getting COVID-19 again and again and again. Let's take a final look at the chat. Strategically adaptive memeplex Catholics are pushing their dogma on others with repo issues. Well, they're pushing Catholic dogma on Nancy Pelosi, who is putatively a Catholic. Nancy Pelosi is under no obligation to remain in the Catholic Church or any other church. No obligation whatsoever. I mean, these same people are now bleating about violation of church and state, separation thereof, are the same people who cheered when Pope Francis, the first and hopefully the last, started lambasting Donald Trump and lambasted him repeatedly. Oh, Donald Trump is a bad person because not everyone can enter the United States of America. They thought that was great. Let's see. Chokin666 says, looks like cops chased shooter into school and left him in there for an hour before making a breaching attempt. Yeah, you know what they call that? They call it protecting the perimeter. That's what they call it. We saw it at Columbine. You had these children screaming, holding up signs saying, our teacher is bleeding to death, please help. And what the cops typically do is they wait until the person has expended all his ammunition, or his guns jam, or he has killed himself. When the shooting stops, that's when the cops enter. It's just disgraceful. Quachalango says Jesus never talked about responding to an OSHA violations. David the Gnome says leftists never read the Bible or take it seriously, nor will they stick around to be reproved on their misunderstanding because they don't care. They have a secular program to pursue. Yes. Strategically adaptive memeplex says Catholics deceive themselves to call it a morality issue. It's been corrupting and unhinging the laity. I think it very much is a morality issue. I don't really see how it could be regarded otherwise. And, we were informed years ago that people are not using abortion as contraception, as birth control. Oh, so now condoms are available everywhere, birth control pill. I mean, it's cheap. And there's other forms of contraception. We're supposed to believe that those don't exist. Oh, the trauma of these people who forced birth. Really? How is it forced birth? No, I have to shake my head at that one. So how can people fill their deceased loved ones and pets. It cheapens a somber moment. Okay, maybe that was an autocorrect. Okay, that's it for today. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.